What's up? Welcome to the weekend. This is The Loop, and I'm Connor. This week, we saw Democratic primary results come in, a naval cruise from hell, and the president hiding in a food cart. On Tuesday, Minnesota and Wisconsin voted in gubernatorial and Senate primaries. Combined with the Michigan primary that occurred last week, these three Midwest races can tell us a lot about where the Democratic Party is headed, but I think the national media is focused on the wrong stuff. The national media has framed these three races as the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, versus the Democratic establishment. Think Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries. However, I think the real difference in this race was the endorsements, or lack thereof, from Bernie Sanders and AOC. In Minnesota, Peggy Flanagan, a progressive insurgent, defeated Angie Craig, who was the establishment choice for the Senate nomination. In Michigan, Abdul El-Sayed, another progressive, defeated Haley Stevens, who again was the establishment choice. However, in Wisconsin, Francesca Hong, a third progressive insurgent, lost to David Crowley, who had literally dropped out of the race weeks earlier and had been pulled back in by the establishment. So what set Flanagan and El-Sayed apart? Arguably, it was the endorsement of Bernie Sanders and AOC, who refused to endorse Hong. As an aside, neither Flanagan nor Abdul are technically DSA, but kind of doesn't matter for the purposes of this discussion. So while the DSA has had some major wins, namely Mamdani up in New York, Milat Kyrgios out in Colorado, and Chris Robb here in Philly, the group has a negative 26 favorability score nationwide. And while the establishment has held on to some power, the Democratic Party itself has a negative 22 favorability score. Essentially what that means is 2/3 of people don't like either group, the DSA or the Democrats. So what do Democratic voters want? I think they want the progressive populism on offer from Flanagan and El-Sayed without the extra woke stuff that Hong brought to the table. Bernie Sanders, a pioneer of progressive populism, and AOC, who's arguably the standard bearer for the progressive movement, recognized this. While all three candidates ran on abolishing ICE, creating healthcare coverage for all Americans, and rooting out corruption, El-Sayed and Flanagan stayed away from more of the left online cultural issues, which Hong had leaned into. She famously came out as anti-Thanksgiving because of its oppressive roots, and described how she had been adjacent to whiteness because her child is mixed race. My big takeaway from these races is that people want progressive populists who are going to fight hard and focus on the economy, not social justice issues, even if their policy platforms contain support for trans rights, support for indigenous groups, support for some of the more marginalized communities in the country. But I think voters really want that focus to be on the economy. But voters will also listen to trusted, quote unquote, established figures. And there's no one with higher trust right now in the Democratic Party than Bernie Sanders or AOC. I think these two will be very important to watch in 2026 and 2028 as they kind of set the course for where the party's going. Let's go to the high seas. Remember that war that we're fighting against Iran? Well, the president's grand strategy involves a blockade at the Strait of Hormuz, and he's essentially trying to block Iran's more effective blockade, which means he's got to station ships in the Arabian Sea. One ship blockading the strait is the USS Abraham Lincoln, and it has been deployed for a record 240 days. That is a U.S. military record. We fought a world war against Japan and didn't have ships deployed for that long. That means these sailors have not been to port, have not touched dry land in 240 days. Sailors aboard the ship are understandably incredibly despondent. They are literally throwing themselves overboard in the hopes of getting sent home. Food is running low, bathrooms are becoming unusable, and none of these sailors know when, if ever, they're going to head home. The president, he doesn't seem too concerned. He told a group of reporters that the ship, quote, hasn't been deployed for nearly long enough. Much like the rest of the war, the president seems to have no plan, no direction, and no end goal. He wanted a blockade, so he forced the Navy to move a ship out there without much of a plan, and now he's leaving the sailors out to dry. I really am not sure what his end goal is with this war. I don't even know if he knows, but the war itself is costing taxpayers, all of us, billions of dollars. And all we're getting in return is some pissed off sailors throwing themselves off of boats. Good stuff. Speaking of piss, we have to talk about the president's daring escape from danger while stuffed into a food cart. During his trip to Turkey to attend the NATO summit, the president decided to use his own cabinet, including Stephen Miller, Marco Rubio, and J.D. Vance, my fave trio, as bait. The Secret Service apparently thought that Air Force One was going to get attacked by Iran, even though I've been very reliably assured that we've destroyed their military. And so the Secret Service came up with a plan to use Air Force One as a decoy and put the president on a different plane to keep him safe. According to reports, the president was whisked onto this different plane in a food catering truck, along with, and I'm being completely serious here, his golf caddy, a guy named Dan Scavino, and his human printer, Natalie Harp. If you don't know who she is, you really should just Google her, and we'll, I am sure, be talking about her again. So the president gets flown out of Turkey on the regular plane, while Air Force One is full of tons of reporters and his own cabinet, and it gets flown out as bait. It's just wild. The president is hiding in a food cart. It's totally, totally pathetic, and there's no other way to look at it. This is not a guy that is winning a war that he started. So, what did we learn this week? We learned that the Democratic Party maybe going. Ugh. So, what did we learn this week? We learned the Democratic Party might be going the way of Bernie, but not necessarily the way of the DSA. There are American sailors struggling at sea, and the president is hiding in a food cart. Good stuff. So much winning. Speaking of winning, preseason, week 1, Birds, Saturday night. Keep your eye on Darius Cooper. The guy could have a big year.